So, good morning. I'm Brian Kelly. I'm the director of the Fall Thesis program. I want to welcome everybody here today. We have 3 students we're going to look at this morning. And then this afternoon, we'll have 4 students. At 1 p.m., we'll break for lunch so that the reviewers and faculty will go upstairs to the faculty conference room, and we'll have an opportunity to have lunch and some conversation together. I want to welcome our guests today. We have a lot of guests here. Not all of them have arrived yet. As people arrive, I'll introduce them, but I will introduce who we have here at the moment. So sitting to right in front of me is Bill Bonstra, and Bill is a principal in Bonstra Hairsign Architects and an alum of the program. We have next to him Will Andalora, who's the director for the Office of Facility Management and Development in the Maryland Department of Health. And we're happy to reconnect and have you here today. And next to him is Brenda Sanchez, who is the senior architect and design manager for the Smithsonian Institution. And by the way, Will's an alum. We have a lot of alums today. Brenda's an alum. And sitting next to her is Mary Rose Rankin. And Mary Rose is a principal at Perkins Eastman, and she's also an alum of the program. And then sitting next to her is David Gloucester, who is the Director of Education for the Royal Institute of British Architects. We're very happy to have you here today. I've been watching some of your videos that are out there on YouTube about architectural education, very insightful videos, and very happy to have you hop across the pond to visit with us today. I think that's all the guests that are here as of right now. And what I'd like to do is I've lost my, does anybody have a copy of the program? We'll just borrow it for 1 second, wherever the stack of them went to. So I want to introduce Paul Abel, who's doing a thesis, Environment Built for Healing. I was the chair of this committee. Chengri Ding was a member of this committee, and Mohammed Gayapur was a member of the committee. Paul is doing a dual degree in architecture and urban planning. And the topic of this thesis is a topic that we'll see twice this morning, dealing with treatment for cancer. Thank you, Will. And Paul, it's all yours. Just for everybody's, particularly for our guests and faculty, if you have questions at some point, please use the microphone. 1, it'll amplify your voice in the space, and we won't end up doing a Latin mass where you can't hear anything, because we're all facing with our backs to the audience. But more importantly, there are people watching at home on YouTube and some other platform, Facebook and YouTube. So we're out there in space with other people. Very, very well. Go ahead, Paul.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Paul Abel, and today I'll be discussing the thesis proposition, Environment Built for Healing. So the issue we're trying to address here is the fear of medical stress. So medical fear is common, and anxiety around treatment can add stress to an already painful condition. And while tolerable treatment, when experienced several times, can have familiarity and reduced stress, intolerable treatments like chemotherapy, the stress and the anxiety is increased as the negative experience is reinforced on a regular schedule. And so building design can play a key role in the lived experience of patients. Spaces patients receive treatment and can reinforce the negative effects of the treatment, including some spaces can remind patients of unpleasant past memories. So how can a building reduce medical fear? So the first way that I'll be discussing is biophilia. So a building can provide access to and views of nature. So nature is calming and uplifting. Access to nature can be a powerful tool against the stress and fatigue of treatment. And views of nature from inside a space can help a patient to feel connected to the world outside of their treatment. So we can also provide community space. Sharing your experiences with others can make difficult experiences more tolerable. Hearing about the struggles and successes of others helps to make patients realize they are not alone. Learning more about a disease and its effects can help a patient feel more in control. And so the other ways, the final thing that I will be looking into is varied experience. So if a patient repeatedly endures difficult treatment in a building, they'll begin to associate that space with pain and discomfort. However, if a space has both positive and negative memories attached to it, the negative reinforcement can be reduced. So this thesis is an exploration of a combined chemotherapy infusion center and community center for those undergoing cancer treatment. It will seek to bring together nature and community to have the most impact possible on patients enduring treatment. So this project is sited on the Del Carlia Reservoir, which is in the western corner of Washington, D.C. And this particular reservoir has a peninsula that sticks out into it that is wooded. And so that's the site that I chose for this thesis. This is because the building will get views of water on 3 sides, as well as being able to take advantage of the mature forest that already exists on the site. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through some of the spaces that are hopefully different and that feel different than a normal medical environment. So this is the entrance to the building. And so when you enter the space, you see 3 things first. So you can see straight through the building all the way out to the forest on the other side. You can see directly into the garden. You can see the check-in area. So you know where to go right away. There's no confusion when you arrive. And you're immediately reconnected to the outside. You don't spend any time separated from nature. Then we go through the front door. The main courtyard is right there. So this is the check-in area. And you can see the beginning of the waiting area. So the waiting room is something that I wanted to be different from a normal waiting room. So it's laid out as an art gallery so that instead of waiting in rows of chairs like you might be accustomed to, you can move about the art gallery, see the different pieces of art. You can look out into the mature forest. You can sit in any kind of private configuration of furniture, public configuration of furniture. And so this art right now, I'm just showing art of nature, but this can be any type of art that could be donated to the facility. It could be created by people who are at the facility, and it could be rotating public, local artists, and so on. Okay, so this is the first chemotherapy infusion space. So there's 2 types of units. So these are the more public ones where there's hip height walls, there's curtains for optional privacy, but it also gives the patients the option of being in community together. They can still see each other, they can talk. Sometimes patients desire that when they're going through this treatment, but there's also private rooms where, so if a patient wants to receive their infusion completely in private, that's an option for them as well. And so you can see here that the spaces are facing out instead of facing in, like a lot of chemotherapy spaces are, into the site, into the views of the water, into the views of the forest. And so then other chemotherapy units are facing into the courtyard. So this is the first of the community spaces. So this is a community gathering space where events can be held, where the community, where the patients can just gather and spend time together in order to share their experiences. So there's 2 classrooms in this building. And so the idea is that classes can be held to teach the patients about what they're going through. They could have classes on nutrition for how to eat well when they're undergoing chemotherapy, or any number of things that, additional information that they can learn that's outside just the normal treatment. So we have a multi-faith chapel that's at the north point of the building, that has the best views of the water. So we have an indoor botanical garden. So if this is during the winter, or if there's somebody who cannot be outside during any time of the year, they'll be able to connect directly to nature from inside of the building. So here we have the view of the main courtyard. So the plant life is arranged in order to create small rooms. So you can be outside and be in nature, but you can also feel privacy and meet with family in private spaces that are created by the landscape. And so towards the end of the peninsula, on the bottom floor, there's a porch, and that porch is down in the forest area. So where a lot of the building is looking out over the top of the forest at the water, this is looking into the forest. So it's a more forested experience. And so then we also, at the very tip of the peninsula, have a boardwalk so that patients can move down there and spend time near the water. So the hope with this project is to provide a space that the patients want to be in, that hopefully they'll come, like if you need to receive chemotherapy treatment once a month, let's say, hopefully there can be events or classes, group therapy, things that they'll come to on the other days. So maybe they'll come once a week, and then only once a month are they coming for treatment. So then hopefully 75% of their experience in the building is good and positive, and then only 25% of it is experiencing the negative aspects of the treatment. And so now I'd like to open it up to your questions and your comments.
Thank you, Paul. I just wanted to introduce Chris Elcott, who's just joined us as well. He'll be here for this morning and this afternoon. Yeah, very well. So with GWWO Architects, and you may recognize him from participation in Architecture 600 reviews. So if there are questions, clarifications, critique. Let's go first.
Three questions, and take them in whatever order you want. Number one is, when you developed the program for this, is this the sort of size, the service size that these kind of facilities can handle? In other words, the number of people that could be receiving treatment at once. Did you do research on that? Number one. Number two, can you talk a little bit about the tectonics of the building, the structural system, and why that was a good choice, and elaborate on that a little bit? And third, a site plan question. Is there a parking lot for staff anywhere nearby?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, I could see the drop off, but is there anywhere where I kind of,
Yeah.
because presumably some of these people may not be as ambulatory as people who are not sick.
Right. So the idea, so there's multiple parking solutions. So for one, this right here at the bottom, this is Sibley Hospital. And so it has a parking structure that, and this is within walking distance. So you theoretically can park in the Sibley parking structure and move up to the building. There would also be some sort of a shuttle service if need be. And then there's also a parking lot here. You can see that black rectangle right there. That can be used by staff, or it can be used by patients who are able to walk up.
Okay.
And so, yeah, in terms of the load, I don't remember the exact numbers in terms of patients, but this is within the this is definitely within the the possibility. And originally I had a lot fewer chemotherapy infusions, cells here. I don't know if cell's the best word, but and so I reached out to Robert Sands at Wilmot Sands, who is a local healthcare firm, and discussed with him the proportion of the community space to the medical space, and he encouraged me to bump it up. So that's where it's at today.
And I forgot to mention too, that this morning's themes are all the relationship between architecture and wellness. I want to introduce Michael Marshall of Michael Marshall Design, who's just joined us as well. So
Last question was about the tectonics of the building and stuff.
Yeah, so the building is arranged in several rectangular shapes. So you can see here, so there's a rectangle here, a rectangle here, and a rectangle here, and then two squares. And so then it's arranged around, most of the time, a 20-foot column grid, and it's broken only occasionally when need be. So like for the chapel, for instance, there isn't a column that lands in the middle of the chapel. So the idea with this is to have these spaces not be so large that you end up getting disconnected from the natural environment outside. So for instance, with the chemotherapy suite, there's the core, and then we're able to get the large aisles and all the chemotherapy suites facing to the outside. The basic proportion of all the volumes is arranged to generate as much space with access to the exterior as possible.
CLT.
Yes.
Elaborate. Could you talk about why that was the choice here?
So I did not. It's a good question. The use of CLT is because the exposed structure is a natural material, and so it helps with the biophilia concept, where the building feels a lot more natural because you can see the exposed wooden structure.
I'm going to do the Phil Donahue thing here today.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for bringing this to our attention. My couple questions I have, and you can answer them. A personal question: Do you have a relation with where did the issue of wellness and cancer come from? Do you have a personal interest in that? Number two, I would like you to talk more about why the building looks like it does, and from a planning perspective. I like to see some diagrams, some exploration of different ideas. You have a sort of a rigidly geometric building. And I think you have some delightful things happening in your elevations, but you haven't really talked about that. And I think there's an emphasis on these interior renderings, which are quite good as renderings, but I don't think they tell me enough about why. And that's the tectonics question maybe that goes to Matt's. Why does it look like it does? Why is it articulated this way? Great site. Love it. Thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of my personal connection, so I have when I was young, I had like a number of medical procedures, kind of minor, but it helped me connect to the idea of medical fear and anxiety. And so that's the main thing that I wanted to look into, was how to make a space that would reduce medical fear. And it coming over my research, the thing that sort of begged to be addressed the most was chemotherapy. If you have to pick any one treatment, the one that has the most reinforced medical fear is chemotherapy. So that's the idea, is to pick the function that it can have the most impact on. And so, yeah, the exterior expression. So the building was designed from the sort of core out. And so the idea is that there is a porch that runs all the way around the outside of the building so that you can come out and be, you can come out and spend more time in nature from the majority of the places on the building, excluding the chemotherapy area. There's not enough room. It's a little bit larger than the other spaces. And the other thing is that the facade has like a porosity to it, the way that there's the eaves and the columns. It creates like an additional zone. So you have the nature, and then you have kind of a mixed zone, and then you go into the building, which I think helps to mix the space instead of just having nature and then it ends at the wall. It kind of helps as like a medium to bring the nature into the building.
You gotta grab it.
Grab it. Yeah, you gotta grab it.
Okay, is that grab it up? Okay. I, I have a question for
Mhm.
you regarding the typology. Is this a new typology that you're trying to introduce? Like a lot of the experiences that I have had with people close to me, you go to the hospital to have your chemotherapy. Is this a new typology that you're trying to introduce to ameliorate that experience, to make it better? And if so, did you actually talk to people? Did your research include people that are actually having chemotherapy, that you are able then to go from that experience to design how they should be treated? And if they want to be in these open spaces where they're next to somebody else that is also going through the
Yeah.
same treatment and so forth?
Yeah, so I spoke to a number of people. I didn't speak to somebody who's undergoing chemotherapy, but I spoke to a number of people who had family members who underwent chemotherapy, and they would be in the spaces with their family members and help them through the process. And again, I got a lot of help from Robert Sands at Wilmot Sands, who he and his firm designed 2 cancer facilities, both for Inova. So one of them is the SCAR Cancer Institute, which is a large medical building. And then they also designed the Life with Cancer, which is a like very residential looking building that is just about the community spaces. And, they hold classes and they hold community gatherings and this sort of thing. And so he had designed both, but he had not combined them. And so that is the new concept that I'm bringing, is the combination of these 2 things for the, as I discussed before, the reducing the negative reinforcement of having negative experiences in the space. I'm hoping that you can have negative and positive experiences in the space to reduce the stress. And so then when you come to the building, you remember positive things and negative things. Yeah, and so as I talked about before with the site, it's right near Sibley Hospital. And so they have a very advanced cancer wing as well. So they can work together. They can be referred out to this facility from Sibley.
Thank you for your presentation earlier. I will second something Bill said about process and diagrams.
Yeah.
They're beautiful and they tell a great story. And I strongly recommend all students to not be afraid to write alongside your beautiful renderings and finished plans to, you have two panels on the side to pin up some of that creative analysis and those diagrams. One that I would have loved to have seen was a slightly larger pull-out, perhaps regional view of where this location is to get a better understanding of a patient's approach to the building and sort of what's surrounding. That anxiety sometimes starts before you even get to the chemotherapy chair on that drive there, both for the patient as well as the family that are going with them, sponsoring them. And so I'd love to have seen a little bit more maybe diagrams on that approach experience, both from the secondary streets getting to the, are you driving past the hospital, this large Sibley complex, and then coming into this more quiet, secluded area? Just something to show a little bit more of the how those emotions someone might go through to get to that. And then also, getting to that front door experience, what is that truly like once you get out of the car and you're coming sort of into the building? I see what appears to be sort of an entry vestibule there by the check-in, but would love to have, to really see what is that experience when you're truly stepping through that threshold, right? From, okay, I'm here, I'm checking in, let's go, right? And one question I have is, I know there's so much during thesis that you have to consider, design, draw, and so sometimes the interiors are one of those just added things that when it comes to the building and the structure and the tectonics that we don't get a lot of time to focus on, but wondering if there was any conversation around color and texture and lighting, in throughout the building, especially related to biophilia and wellness.
Yeah, so in terms of the textures and in terms of like the surfaces within the building, the main biophilia aspect is just the exposed timber structure. And then the remainder would be the different art that's placed throughout the building. I did try to work with some color in the chemotherapy bays for a while, and I ultimately just decided that white was what was working the best.
Paul, thanks for the presentation. If I'm looking at this one,
Yep.
I'll kind of buy it as this sort of rather Schinkelesque palace in a wilderness. Would that it was so. However, see what he did. I'm kind of interested, but I have a huge number of questions. I think it's important that you have an evidence base that allows us to be inherently sympathetic to the idea that there's a community of patients with forms of cancer who are prepared to be, who are prepared to allow a certain amount of intrusion into their therapy. Because I think the way in which individuals react to having something alien in their bodies is going to vary enormously. Now, apropos of that, this is a kind of Beaux-Arts building. I know the facade is telling us something different, but if you look at the plan, it's got a bilateral symmetry about it, possibly slightly too symmetrical. And certainly if you're looking at the variation and how patients are going to react to cancer, surely there's an argument for saying that there needs to be more diversity in the treatment rooms to accommodate the way that different people react to this colossal intrusion on their normal lives. I think that needed more thinking through and more consideration, because the person who may have no problem with a hip height partition in the next space, there may be a person who thinks, I really don't want anybody witnessing this at all. I don't mind the idea of going to a centralized facility to be treated, but I don't want anybody to witness it. And in that sense, I think the plan needs to be more nuanced, the section needs to be more nuanced to accommodate that diversity of reaction. There's another thing I've got, which I think is, I will say this probably to any school, a student of architecture, in any school of architecture, in any continent on earth, which is, I think there has to be something which demonstrates that you have read and analyzed the context in a manner that completely convinces us that that is the only non-negotiable place for the building to be. Now, I get the water on three sides thing. What I don't get is the orientation. I actually would have flipped it through 90 degrees. And there's a reason for this, that when you look at the longer facade, it creates these areas of slightly nebulous wall here and here, which would actually, if you'd flipped the thing, you wouldn't have had that architectural problem to deal with. And then I think, I love the idea of immersion in nature. It's a wonderful concept, but you have to be kind of brutal in convincing us that these patients are immersed in nature. Putting it in a forest ain't quite enough. That's sort of like 6.5 out of 10, okay? I think you have to be, I think the way in which nature enters the building has to be more, I was going to say aggressive, but assertive would be a better word. There's a danger, isn't there, that if things are only in planters, it kind of looks like the lobby of a corporate bank. And it's probably about allowing nature into the building, but also the views out to be orchestrated by cutting into that forest, of creating avenues. You know, I'm English, you guessed. Sorry. But, you know, we created a vocabulary of the mansion, the stately home and the ground, and the reciprocating landscape, that external landscape and the internal landscapes of the building. And I think you needed to do more with the forest in terms of both sculpting it and allowing it into the building and adding to it to enhance that experience of immersion in nature. Sorry, these aren't questions, they're observations, but
No, I appreciate
I'm
it. Thank you so much.
You know, the business of flipping the building is an interesting sort of observation. I have the same impulse, principally because I think it would speak to the kind of layering of the site towards the water, that you come in and there's a kind of very public side on one side of the courtyard and a very much more private side on the other side of the courtyard. And the way it works now is that the entry pathway is a kind of line of fracture that suggests an equivalency between the two sides. But in actual fact, I think the site is highly layered from a very ordered system of Sibley and all the sort of ER stuff in the backside there, and then this natural business of the reservoirs. So I think that would have some benefit too. It would also, I think, help clarify some of the sort of locational issues of things. So for example, to me, the cafe and the Botanic Garden and the chapel are a little funny located to me, because if I read this correctly, the cafe, which one presumes would have food and things, they have to use that elevator there and gondola things all the way through the building, which may not be the best arrangement. If the cafe sat over on that side, maybe it could be closer to the elevators. Functionally, it might allow that stuff to be a little bit easier. By the same token, I wonder if the Botanical Garden is doing what you want it to do on the first floor of the building there, when in fact you have this big courtyard space that the building envelops. It strikes me that if you flip the Botanical Garden and the chapel could be something that family members could participate in on the first floor, and it would have a more public place, which seemed logical to me. And the garden could go to the roof, which would allow for it to be a very different kind of space in the courtyard than the courtyard space, you know. And it's just, it would help to render that side of the building a little bit more coherent in terms of the kind of uses that go on there. you know, and I think that there is a dividing line. You read it very strongly in the second floor plan between one side of the building and the other side of the building, the sort of public and private side of the building, and it might help reinforce those things.
I would like to know, I think that it's great that you're trying to develop this to give people this, alleviate this fear that people have and this anticipation of the treatment and so forth. But I don't see how people are going to feel getting there. I don't even see the entrance. I found the entrance in plan looking at the desk. I say, oh, that's the desk. That's where the entrance must be. How do people know how to go? There is no sense of big entrance to this space that is welcoming to people. So it's sort of missing that. A site plan would have been very good to see that process and the experience that people go through before they get to that entrance, and then maybe having a very welcoming entrance, which is not just the desk. Maybe that's where you start incorporating some of the biophilia, some of the greenery, so people start to feel relaxed inside the space. Similarly, I think I mentioned that, and also was mentioned before, is the fact about people, did you talk to people who received the treatments? Because I don't think they would want to be alone. You told me, well, I did, but they are with their families. Well, in those little cubicles, they're alone, they're not with their families. So it's like the community spaces are separate from the areas in which they're actually being treated, which is when they need the support of the family and the people around them.
First of all, sorry for getting here late, but just a quick look at what you've done reminds me of what Herzog and de Meuron has been doing with healthcare. You know, that's a firm that sort of became known for museums and art-related projects. But a lot of their work now for healthcare is a sort of mass timber construction, porches, areas where patients can sort of go out. And as someone mentioned earlier, how it embraces the landscape, especially this site that you've selected. I've always been driving by MacArthur Boulevard, looking across the water there, and even seeing the houses on the Maryland side and said, wow, this is a really nice setting. You know, why isn't it used more? Well, I'm sure it's because it's the Army Corps of Engineers control it. But I think what you're doing here, I find interesting is questioning the whole typology of hospitals and medical care. So I sort of applaud the idea that you've put it in a wooded landscape, and maybe there are things about shifting it on the site and rotating and perhaps understanding the solar exposure and orientation, things like that. But to not really following the interior, but knowing that this partie looks like it could give the patients a sense of calmness looking out into the landscape. It's really funny for me at my working from home, I have a big window wall of glass and there's a tree that comes all the way up. And it's interesting watching seasonally the squirrels come and they, you know, start, you know, all the things that they're doing. The trees change, they lose the leaves, you know, like now.
Right.
And you see the structure of the trees, and then when it's green, you know, it's different. It sort of camouflages the street level. So I just think that this is interesting, and you should take a look at what Herzog and de Meuron are doing, because they're doing it consistently from one site or one location to another. I think some of the Swiss hospitals and the Danish hospitals, I think that they're doing, and even in San Francisco, a little bit different, but it's interesting to watch very good firm that's really thoughtful about things, that they've come to this conclusion to having this kind of a aesthetic. So I think you should take a look at
Yeah,
it.
thank you. Yeah, I will.
Do you know their work at all?
No,
Okay, take a look.
I will. Yeah, thank you.
I just have one. Did you want to say something? I wanted to go back a little bit to the idea of these porches and how that impacts the spaces inside the building. And maybe you just didn't talk about it, but you have these large brows sort of universally around the building. And I know you have a north arrow there, but again, as someone mentioned about the sun, you don't have any shading on that upper left cube, right? Is there a chapel? Is it a chapel
Yep.
in that cube?
Yep. It
Okay,
is.
so you're not really talking about how those spaces are going to be different than all these other spaces that you've created in this building.
Mhm.
And maybe you know it and you did it. Well, you're exposed, your glass is out to the face. So is it right to put a chapel where the sun is just going to blind you, or should the chapel be more insular? So there's lots of contradictions here that I struggle with. And I think you've got to get your discussion down. I mean, you might have thought of these things, and you might have thought, I like this last board because it starts to bring wood into the spaces, right?
Right.
But this doesn't tell me anything about how the importance of wood and natural materials in a natural setting. So, I think there's a disconnect.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
First, I'll say that there's something really handsome, in the fact that you tried to be very rational with how the grid sort of begins to organize itself on this site. I note that I'm not seeing. Well, when I look at the southwest facade and the northeast facade, I realize that there's quite a bit of topography change. And I'm just wondering if you didn't present your building sections, but I wonder if there was an opportunity for this building, and I don't work in healthcare, and I understand that perhaps, as little levels as possible might be better to get patients around quickly. But I just wonder if the building could have stepped down or leveraged this topography in a different way. I mean, you've got 3 floors and 3.5 floors, and it could as well have been a flat site, and this solution probably could have been plugged somewhere else. So that was just one thought. The other thing, I'm closest to the 3rd floor plan, so that's the one I see the most. And with the balconies, the earlier comment, most of the treatment rooms do not get to use that balcony, but you've got like maybe 1 or 2 rooms, the classrooms and therapy rooms can. So I don't know if you could just, teach me a little bit, because I think it'd be a little weird for me to be in one of those treatment rooms and seeing somebody walk back and forth. And how, what were you thinking about the patient experience?
Yeah, so originally the porches on the treatment rooms were meant to be able to be occupied. But because of the immunocompromisation
Yeah.
aspect of chemotherapy, we ended up having to remove that aspect. So these are sealed off. There's 2 larger private rooms that do open. So just in case somebody is in a particular state that they can experience that, there's a few rooms that would accommodate that. It also lets the staff get out there if they need to. But so originally they were occupiable, and then they became more of a sun shading element after the fact, after we decided that because of the immune concerns, we couldn't have the chemotherapy open.
There's a completeness and a passion to healthcare, and I think you obviously understand the treatment issues, and I think it's great that you reached out to Wilmot Sands. They're one of the best of that sort of thing around and stuff. And I think what I like about the project is using this different aesthetic, this sort of very warm, human, tactile, sort of warm aesthetic for a building that you know, probably historically has had a more of an institutional kind of character to it, which obviously you're making a critique of. And what I like to, I think the suggestion about rotating the building would give the courtyard, this sort of formal courtyard, this view out into nature, so you could get the best of both worlds, that would play a much more prominent role in the building, that you would have this sort of very designed courtyard that might be one character looking out into the natural landscape in a way that is more central to the experience of the building. One thing I think I'm missing a little bit, and you spent a lot of time on these interiors, and a lot of them are really very interesting and tell a nice story. I think were you to take this further, what you would want to do is study acoustically how all of these things work, because I see a lot of hard surfaces in these interiors, and I know you spent a lot of time with the wood aesthetic and the views to the outside. But I think some of these spaces might be a little bit noisy. And with a lot of people coming and going, and, you know, the sort of the way sound could carry, and somebody could hear the treatment discussion of one group versus another group or person and things like that, you may want to have a very focused thought about, you know, how do I minimize sound transmission in places where I really don't want it? You know, and I think those floors you're designing are all wood, right, in most of these places? Yeah, and then like I look at a perspective like these three right here, and I really don't see anything that has, other than possibly the ceiling, anything that has a kind of sound absorptive quality to it. And I think in a place like this, that would be really a very central issue.
I know Phil, I knew Phil Donahue. I know how this works.
Thanks. Quick comment, because I know we're almost at time. I really appreciate greatly the care you took with your investigation of the interior. And if I was to make a recommendation about process as you go forward in your career, I think you picked an absolutely gorgeous site. The form of the site is well, it has a real formal quality to it. It's like the prow of a ship sailing into the body of water there. I think it would have been a good investment to build a site model. I think that if you had experimented with different orientations, I think that you would have rotated your building 90 degrees to look out over the prow of the hill. And I think there are two possibilities. One is that you enter the courtyard, which would have given you the opportunity to create that welcome both in the courtyard and to make a lobby inside the building that, made the flow of space from outside to inside. And if you had tried the opposite, entering into a long facade, then the courtyard would have been a fabulous surprise because you would have opened to this beautiful courtyard, which would then have opened, onto the vista.
Right.
I think that your decision to enter into the corridor, I think that minimizes the beauty of the spaces that you're creating. And I think it kind of contravenes the form that you've selected. So my process suggestion, I think, is spend a little time in that relationship with the landscape phase before you move to the part of the project that you clearly love so much. And anyway, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Joseph, on last Friday, I took Rob Sands to lunch at Cosmos Club, and we talked about your project, and we talked about the improvement of your project. And I think Rob was grateful for that sort of transaction on my part. If you help Paul, I will help, I will take you to the club for lunch. And that was, for a lot of people, that's extraordinary. I guess it's all rubbed off on me now. It's a normal thing. I would appreciate it if you would follow up to Rob and thank him, because I want to stress that series of encounters with Rob that was in September and October of this year was a huge game changer for Paul and his thesis. Paul started off, he did his thesis prep semester in fall of last year. And he arrived at the thesis semester in the spring with a site that was like a 300-acre park site north of here that was ill-advised on the part of the faculty who critiqued you in 790. I'm being blunt. They should have done a better job at narrowing down the site because it was he could have spent the next 2 years just dealing with site. We arrived at this hypothetical site as a way to engage a pre-existing facility. It is in my mind that Hopkins would build this. Some donor, would build this as part of the Hopkins treatment plan, and this would be part of the Hopkins facility at Sibley. The program that Paul arrived with last January was a program that had chemotherapy, outpatient patient surgery, a kind of club aspect to it, a kind of rehabilitation aspect to it, and a spa aspect to it. And it was, the program was, again, ill-advised. And, we had to narrow this down throughout the spring semester until Eureka, we came to the chemotherapy center. And then Paul took time. I think over the summer you reached out to Rob, had your first encounter with Rob. And Rob was instrumental in conveying the reality. I think back in October, late October, early November, you had your final crit with Rob, and Rob said, you don't have enough chemotherapy space. If they're going to build this, it has to be heavier on that kind of stuff. The last thing I'd just say is so I think you've heard from these folks a little something about working method that you and I know, but maybe they don't know. I'm going to tell them, but I want you to think about it. And if there are, students that are thinking about doing thesis in the future, we were just so heavily involved in Revit throughout the entire process, and hand-drawn diagrams were so few and far between. And Revit it's just a tool. And Revit it's for production. And SketchUp might have been better, or some other more malleable form. But it is also not friendly to modeling the site when you don't have a lot of site information about contour and stuff like that. And so that disconnect between building and site that many of you have mentioned is perhaps as much your attitude towards the analysis, but it is also the tool that you used to explore. The tool of Revit is building centric. It doesn't really care about the landscape. And you did care about it, and we had a lot of discussions about the healing garden, the purposes placed to have places of seclusion, places to restore and be healthful. So, I'm very happy. Here we are in December, a year later. We've gotten to a point where we can applaud your success, and thank you for being a good-spirited. You never lost faith in what you were doing. You took critiques one day at a time, and a lot of times we would hammer you one way or the other, but you did a very admirable job at getting yourself to this point. So thank you very much, Paul. We are going to turn and face in that direction, and our next presenter will also have a theme about healthcare. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just didn't know that. So it's all right. Show up and two hands. There you go. We'll need 3 hands. very strong students. Any focal lines on any of these drawings? Hi.
Hi, I'm Naomi.
Naomi, great to see you. Yes, I am. Why don't you pull a seat up in the front row? Here you go. Oh, there's one there. Have a seat there. My eyes are like good at this. Okay, we're about to get started again here, which means I have to put my reading glasses on. The gallery over there was just confessing that we're all having trouble seeing at some distance. And I'm gonna recommend contact lenses for distance and then gradiated readers. But the gradiated readers cost a lot of money and you don't want to lose them. So we continue our discussion about architecture and healing and architecture and wellness. And our next project deals again with the topic of cancer treatment. And perhaps we've heard a kind of premonition of what that kind of treatment's going to be, in that it's more hybrid than the last facility we saw. I just want to introduce, before we get started, I'm not going to introduce all these folks because you heard them earlier on talking and they're on the sheet, but I want to introduce Naomi Sachs here in the front row, colleague from Landscape Architecture, and thank you for joining us today. And she's arrived and she'll be with us through the afternoon. So that's lovely. And we have, our next student is Hannah Grael. Her chair was Professor Joseph Williams, right there. And her committee was comprised of Ken Filler over here in the blue shirt and myself. You'll notice I'm on all these committees. I'm the control. And I'll just let you ponder that word. Hannah, have fun, okay?
Testing. Hello, everybody. Really great to see everybody. Thank you for coming. As you can see, cancer topic is a really big one and it's a really important one. So I really look forward to sharing life after diagnosis with you. So I want to start with saying cancer is a universal illness that touches lives across the globe, transcending boundaries of geography, culture, and background. Whether someone has faced cancer personally or supported a loved one through it, the journey after that diagnosis is unexpected and challenging. And that battle, it can change a person's life ultimately for anybody in the case. And through statistics shown on this slide, new cancer cases in 2022, there's 20 million of those cases, and 9.7 million of those cases related to death. And let's just go a little further. 1 in 5 people in a group can conduct cancer and get diagnosed with cancer. So that just proves how important this topic is. Like this. Oh, got you. But as you can see, that this is a very important topic about, it's not about how to prevent cancer, how to do it, even though we're trying. It's more about how can we treat it to a better overall being, less than just medicinal, but also about the stressful parts of it. As these pictures show, it can be a very sterile environment. It's very cold and you don't really see a lot of people. It's a lot of bland colors. So typically that can result in stressful feelings. So the process went through was thinking about different studies and experiments that they'd done on cancer patients, but also through experiments by Steve Cole, who he infused tumor cells within mice. And he realized that beings that were in stressful situations actually resulted in tumor cells expanding quicker, but those that were in calmer experiences and spaces slowed down the process. So that just proves that we need to factor in stress within how we treat our cancer patients. So that leads to this final question before we dive into more fun stuff. How can architecture and design elements be utilized to create a calming and therapeutic community environment to support the mental well-being of cancer patients? And I want you to think about that while we're going through this presentation. So we're going to go through two kind of examples of past and present time precedents that really think about healing and less about medicine and hospitals, but just overall healing, making the experience comfortable. Bathhouses, for example, in Rome, that's usually for, collectives being able to socialize, but also just overall healing to be calm. So it's less about, actually healing something, but it's more about calming yourself and providing that calm environment. And a more present example, which is kind of a really big driver for this project, was St. Charles Cancer Bend in Bend, Oregon. This project really startled me because of how beautiful they incorporated the infusion spaces, where instead of cubicles or you're kind of sitting next to different people, you're more faced towards nature. That's what you're looking towards. And usually when you ask a person, what do you do when you're stressed out? The first thing that they always say is, I go outside, I look outside. That's the first thing that anybody ever says. So this was kind of an inspiration for this project on how to utilize space to face outward, less inward. After doing that analysis of some precedents, I found these three terms to be the main ones that kind of derived calm healing spaces, which is comfort, convenient, and community. Each of these provide a calm environment that de-stresses you. Comfort meaning providing spaces that feel peaceful and relaxing, while also thinking about the needs of cancer patients and their family members that visit, both of them. Convenience meaning organizing spaces that are conveniently placed and spaces are easy to locate, meaning you're easy to wayfinding, because I think we all know that a lot of hospitals are a little confusing to find any spaces. And community is most important. By having a community that relates to you can help you through your process. It can help you feel seen and heard, and not just a patient, but a human. And that's the forefront of this project. So I'd like to introduce you to our site. This is MedStar Good Samaritan in Baltimore, Maryland. It's more of the northern part of Baltimore, probably the outskirt border of Baltimore City. There was a couple different site options, but this one really stood out to me for multiple reasons, and I'll show you through some analysis. One being the beautiful surrounding area of a calm neighborhood. When I did some site analysis on my own, just walking around the area is full of, senior citizens, new family members. The housing felt very, historic and warm. It's a beautiful community. But then you see this figure ground, and there's this huge mass in the center of this beautifully dense area. And for me, the first thing I thought was, why can't we densify that? So instead of just placing another big mass here, my first thought was, let's kind of go big, medium, small by densifying this area. I also did some analysis of the buildings around, yellow and kind of yellowish, representing the residential, really showing how it's just mostly residential with this big block hospital in the center. Then I wanted to dive deeper, looking at the program of the site, seeing what's around, seeing what program already exists there, and seeing how I could really add to this site. We did find that the cancer area right here is brand new. They just built it. However, the spaces still feel kind of cold and white and sterile, and we're trying to strive for maybe a different way of designing that can stray from that as a different option. So before I start digging into the project, I wanted to kind of walk through this project as focus groups so you guys can kind of put yourself in these people's shoes. So one focus group that would come to this site is an inpatient. His name is Adam, age 39, and his cancer type is leukemia. For him, he's coming on the site to retrieve treatment in the new infusion building. He's been in the hospital for 4 days. Then we have focus group 2, Aria. She's an outpatient. She's 23, and her cancer type is gynecolic cancer. She came to the site to receive physical therapy and has come with her family support. Now I'm going to introduce you to our new cancer center. This is just beautiful axons, just to show you what the building looks like within the context. Before, I don't know if you remember, that beautiful canopy of trees. Well, this way, I really wanted to almost weld those trees onto the site, making it less of a parking lot and this gaping mass. It's more of this language with building and landscape. So talking about the first floor, the program really walks through different program types, mostly thinking about mental spaces, physical therapy. We're talking about directory, treatment spaces. I just realized I did not include the labels, but I can explain them thoroughly. So the mass on the left would be the directory building for people to enter into so that you can get accustomed to where you're at. The building on the right of that would be where the treatment would happen for cancer patients here for infusion. The building on the left here would be for mental spaces like meditation, therapy, group therapy, etc. And the building on the top middle would be for physical therapy, spa, just thinking more about physical well-being. And then something else I included was house living. So temporary housing was really important, especially for people that are staying in hospitals for a very long time. Considering the fact that we're right next to a hospital, I think it would have been great for families to have that option to stay right there in case of an emergency. So kind of the second floor, we're walking through more of those spaces of infusion. And the infusion spaces, I wanted them to feel like you had a choice. Usually when cancer patients go and get treatment, you only have one choice and you're sitting around people also getting infusion, and it's a very stressful situation. For this new infusion space, you would have an option of either an open floor plan, or you could have a cubicle, or you could have your own separate space. But all of those spaces face outwards. Even the physical therapy, the mental spaces always face towards the vegetation. The symmetry diagram represents kind of this idea of convenience. Even though this is not one building, it's pretty close proximity to each other. And it's very easy to read. It's very easy to see each and every building so you're not lost. And each building acts as its own program. You don't have to wonder, where am I? What am I getting here? You understand exactly what you're getting in. And then the last floor is the interesting floor with that big perspective in the middle, is our beautiful public space. And the idea of the basement floor is about family spaces. Usually during cancer care, family is kind of the last thought because, they're usually in the waiting rooms waiting for them to get their treatment. It's a very long process. It can be very stressful for them as well. So by including spaces for the family, such as entertainment spaces, a food court, different programs for maybe teenagers to come and hang out, this allows them to not just have to wait in a waiting room. They can just go and enjoy themselves while their family members getting treatment or therapy, whatever they're here for. Looking at the sections of this building, well, buildings technically, I really wanted this building to act as an anchor. as kind of this marker that it's part of the hospital, but it's its own being. Even though there is a threshold that connects to the hospital, acting as kind of a welcome mat for people welcoming in, it is its own dwelling. And it's almost kind of saying, this is just another option. I'm not trying to replace the hospital. It's more of give it a try. And as you can see, the trees are at level with the roof as well, and the roofs do extend outwards past the walls. And that was part of my inspiration from Mies. Mies has a great idea of extending materials from indoors to outdoors, trying to extend this connectivity between outdoor and indoor spaces. And by doing that, you almost redefine the word enclosure. Instead of just building 4 walls and enclosing people in, the outdoors becomes the hallway, the middle space becomes the waiting room, and the buildings become the program. And here's that elevation, looking at that gorgeous big space in the middle, cutting into the groundscape, and those buildings with the canopy roofs extending outward. Now we're going to go through some walkthroughs of perspectives. So this is the entrance from the hospital, and you're just walking into the threshold. So this is more acting as kind of a portal, and you'll see through both of the entrances, they're acting as this way of taking your mindset off of what you're actually here for by using trees and vegetation and warm materials to kind of give you that calm effect and kind of provide that warmth into the area. Next, we have the infusion space for Adam. This infusion space is what I was talking about having those different options. You could have these hip up walled spaces that are more open plan, but you would be facing towards the nature. Or you could have these cubicle spaces on the side, and then behind us would be those individual rooms that are still open, but are more private so people can't really hear you. And then within the space, there would be these nurse stations so that they would always have the that look-see and look through and being able to get that access to the nurse if they need it. Next, we have the meditation space. Through research, meditation has been a really good thing to help with stress. It's just one of the aspects of the mental building. There would be mental therapy, there would be group therapy, meditation, all these different varieties, choices for you to do, because everybody's different. Everybody uses different tactics and coping mechanisms to calm down. And meditation is a great way to just ground yourself, especially after receiving treatment. So now we're going to move on to Aria. Aria is our outpatient, and she's coming from our parking garage that is provided now onto the site since we're taking parking spots away. This one is also acting as a threshold, but instead now we have these nodes on the side for people to sit and enjoy the nature as they're walking into the site. Again, taking their mind off what they're here for and more about enjoying the space itself. Next, we have the physical therapy space for Aria. Again, anything that deals with the therapy always is facing towards nature. That's always what you're looking at. And anything that has to do with waiting on the site too, waiting rooms, terraces, are looking into the family space in the center. So that while you're waiting, you can remind yourself, it's gonna be okay. I have my family here. It's gonna be good. And last but not least, the big perspective of our family space, the heart of this site. And by making this the heart of the site, this family space, it reminds us that family is kind of the reminder to keep us going, for cancer patients to keep fighting. And by doing that, it almost inspires them and empowers them to keep fighting through their battle. And that's why that's the most important perspective on here. And that is it for my presentation. And I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you, Hannah. Oops, I went. Here, one second.
Sorry, I'm just trying to relate that last perspective that you showed. Would you mind coming out and sort of, is that from the bottom page looking up into your open space, that last vision,
Yeah,
that last
yeah.
image you showed?
So if we go over to the ground, you're basically looking from underneath the bridge, looking outward. So there's a canopy right above you that kind of wraps around the entire space with spaces right underneath as well. But you're at the very end, looking this way towards the stair.
So if you're Adam coming from the hospital,
Yes.
or Aria coming from the parking garage, you're coming in at first floor level?
Yes, that would be there.
So if you then turn to the open space, you're actually up above?
Mm-hmm.
So do you see that space at all as
Mhm.
you're coming in? Or do you have to progress in and make your way down? I'm just want to make sure I understand your section here.
Yeah. So this space would be something that you would go to yourself. It wouldn't just be accessible from the entrances. So we have two options of either taking this grand staircase that's attached to this big water fountain, just incorporating that water feature to calm them down. Or if you have other needs that you're not able to take the stairs, we have multiple elevator options through these three buildings that you can go down to that level as well.
I like a lot of what you're doing here, the spaces and the way that you have placed these buildings in the landscape. But I would appreciate it if you could get more physical for me. Just show me exactly. When a person comes in a car, I come through here, this is what I see, and then I decide where to go, and I have these options. When I come from the other side, whether it's Area or Adam, this is where I see and where I can go to other things, because it will make me understand better how you organize these. I do like the spaces that you have. I like your the way that it was cited, but I'm missing the people part of it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I'm intrigued by the first perspective, the entry from the hospital. The idea that these two buildings could be a portal that could frame a view that you could pass through and then have the experience of the sunken court. I think that's a powerful idea to sync that. But the thing that I don't understand, and one of the things I think that probably needs to be taken into consideration is how do you link the movement through these different pavilions to one another? For patients that are undergoing cancer treatment, I think the movement from an interior to exterior and then back in and then outside again could be taxing. I don't think that means that the diagram for the way the spaces are organized couldn't work with some connection, but I think maybe some more thought to how these buildings are connected and how you flow from one sense of arrival to each space would be helpful. I'm also wondering about the scale on the plans. Is that accurate, the scale, or is that scale for the drawing? Because these buildings seem like they're very small to me relative to how they're being shown in the perspectives.
Yes, they should be accurate. I measured it through using different scale members on the site and measured from there. So they should be accurate.
Can you speak a little bit also, you talk about the stairs that are moving down into this lower space, but I don't see them in the perspective and how they arrive and how they flow into this lower enclosed space.
Were you going to describe that?
Did you want me to?
Yeah, I think it's a good request.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Show us how to get there. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So did you want to walk through with Adam or Aria? Do we have a preference?
You choose.
All right. Let's take it with Aria a little bit. So we're walking from the parking garage right over here that you can see from this little axon over here. So once you walk into here, you see a bunch of little nodes on the side that you're able to sit, and you walk right into the directory building where there will be a desk right here where you can ask which building you need to go into. For her case, she needs to go to her physical therapy appointment, which is in this pavilion right over here. So once she gets her number and she figures out where she needs to go, she goes with her family, enters into the next node and threshold. Then she walks over here, turns, and then she can enter the building through here. However, if she's trying to go down to the family space, she can just go straight into this lookout point right here and take the stairs down and then walk into this pathway right here. So it's basically a covered pathway the entire way around. The only time that it's open is right here. Yes, yes, there's a wall right here of masonry. Just to provide kind of this cave-like experience, since more light wood, steel construction is up above, down below is more concrete masonry. So it feels more kind of grounded, you're within the ground. So kind of keeping that idea, and it's providing this another threshold opportunity for you to kind of be like, oh, I'm walking into something different. I'm walking into a different experience. So it's not giving it away quite yet until you turn that corner. Yes. They would take these elevators or this elevator to access.
Hannah, I would say this is when I look at the size of the Samaritan Hospital, this project is enormous, what you've taken off. And I might even go as far as to guess that your building 3 is probably the size of what Paul just presented. So there is a lot of program here that you're trying to solve. Your central, you know, bravo for biting off such a large project. I guess I would just offer that it sounds like your your decision or your thesis is really trying to provide an experience of calm for people who are facing probably one of the worst diseases in modern life. And so I love your high dollar space for the family, and I would be interested long term in understanding if you had some time to talk about the experience of going from check-in to which pavilion, because if I don't know where I'm going and I'm dealing with treatment, I could still be lost, and I have the how do you manage or help a patient with that type of anxiety? Because I'm going from building 1 to maybe building 4 and then back to 2 before I leave. And I would be interested in understanding, some of those, or maybe this is the next step, but some of what that transition experience is like how are those outdoor spaces handled? How are those pathways handled? Am I back in open air again? Do I have my coat on again? What's happening? Because, all of that matters when I'm, not well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a huge project, so commendable on the subject and the site. I have some related questions. How long does it take if I'm walking or rolling in a wheelchair to get from the parking garage to the entrance?
It's a pretty distance walk. It would definitely take a minute. That's why there would be nodes to rest for
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
So, as these are cancer patients who sometimes have trouble getting to their mailbox at their
Yes.
house, having some sort of electric vehicles that can shuttle people back and forth might be a really good option, and providing for that in the design as well. I think your question about the experience of when you see this internal space, imagine if you're coming and first of all, I do ask about wayfinding, like, is it really clear when I've finally gotten to the entrance, which building I go to? So wayfinding is going to be key. Then I turn here, and rather than seeing a wall, what if I see a water wall? And I immediately know that I and or my family can go to this space. So I think the big reveal, rather than hoping that someone is going to go around the corner either side and then, ooh, look, that's kind of, you know, the big reveal right away. And then I think I had one more, two more. One is think about the staff as well. So it's an incredibly stressful job. They work long hours. And so providing even separate spaces for staff where they can go and have respite. And then the last thing is exercise for the family, for caregivers, for staff, and even for the patients. You know, you have this pond that's really close by. You've created this forest. And so rather than just going in the courtyard where you're kind of in a fishbowl and like, you know, that your family member is getting chemo and watching you, what about being able to take a walk in the woods or being able to go to that pond and, I don't know, feed the ducks or something?
Thank you very much. I want to commend you for the thoroughness of your exploration here. I think we were talking about that on the first project and analyzing the site, understanding the features there. You picked an interesting site for this. It's certainly appropriate. I like the fact that you've grown a lot of trees and got rid of the damn parking lot. There's some really fascinating things here. I assume that the space that you see over in this image is more contemplative. That's where that's going to be quiet, and you're going to have that green exposure on this side, right? So, and I think that's an appropriate use of materials, and having that somewhat depressed down and seeing over top of it is really wonderful. The last thing I'll say is you have a very formal symmetry and geometry for the building, but you have been able to break it in many places where it doesn't work. And I see that in some of the pavilions, which might have started out more symmetrical, but then I think you modified it to make the program work. And that's, I think, quite wonderful. This one here is not in that same symmetry as some of the others. And you let one piece grow a little bit along the edge. I might have just brought that to the same place along the right side in your site plan. But I'd like that framework for a start and then what it actually became. So I like what you've done here. Thank you.
I'm interested in what you did with all that parking. You know,
It's right there.
yeah, but I know, but you know, did you quantify the amount of parking that's there? And it must be necessary, at least let's assume it is. And if that's the case, your parking garage is probably 5 to 6 stories, but you're not showing it like that. And so that's, and then there's also, no, because where I'm going to with it, how do you know, maybe patients will come here, Uber or someone will drop them off. What makes, where is it here that you can be dropped off close to the entry so there's not a long walk? Okay, so that's a turnaround there. It probably needs, again, that sort of circle is still removed from the entry. And your entry, it seems like you're really sort of pushing things, the entrance to come from the parking garage to that as the main entry, and then this one.
Yeah.
So I almost think you have to decide,
Yeah.
you know, which one is more prominent or the real entry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my question though is that there could have been, not a question, a challenge to really embed some of that parking within this footprint, some of it, maybe not all of it, which could then reduce the scale, maybe closer to what you're showing volume-wise for the parking.
Yeah.
And then especially with this basement level, maybe there's parking down there, you have the elevators, you know, just the ease of getting people, as someone said here today, it's tough just getting from your house to the mailbox when you're in that condition. So that's what I see. Another way maybe of looking, and just to point out another way of looking at your courtyard, some people might not think it's a good example, but the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, it's like a captured forest inside. And so you could have, it's going to take 50 years to grow all those trees like that. So you're not going to have the immediate impact of what you're trying to do here. But a smaller grove or something that's more controlled in that courtyard and more, I don't want to say Zen-like in this sort of minimalist idea, but something more natural, because I think that's what you're after by wrapping the building in a faux forest that you've created. I think also being able to see those stairs coming down, the sides of them, I think right now they're hidden. And again, it's to get that massive wall, which is fine. But that wall could have been further back on the other side of the stringer of those stairs and then see them come down. So it is more inviting and sort of a better reveal that there's that connection. But what I also like, not unlike the previous one, is the sort of residential attitude in the massing and the materials and the CLT and all of that stuff to sort of counter the hospital. And, that it is, the wellness and what happens afterwards when you're stuck there for your rehab. So those were really, I think, good choices. So the parking, like I said, it was more of a challenge to really quantify where all that parking is going, because the parking is for the hospital also. So it's not just for your facility. Okay.
Yeah. I think maybe a diagram that could have been added to your, and thank you for showing the analysis here. It's very helpful. I think one more diagram that potentially could be done that may have triggered some sightings thoughts would be a sun diagram across the site. East and west facades are two of the hardest to control glare. And so a lot of times, healthcare is not my forte, schools are, but we face the same issue, right? Learning environments, stress, glare. And so, looking at the sun path here, one idea potentially, what if this building, rotated 90 degrees where it's more of a north-south, where you can have more of the open windows without all the sunshades to help control that glare. And thinking about that, that would rotate your entrance slightly more towards the area where you have the parking garage. And again, like thinking about, okay, placement on the site, is there then a central court, right, that can both bring the entrance from the mobility standpoint closer to where someone might be parking, allow a family member to drop off and then have a very close proximity to where they need to park to get back and catch up with the patient. But also, for me, the arrival and the treatment while you're there is one thing, but there's always that, the ultimate goal, right, is that someday you're getting out, right? So that inspirational element, view, destination on campus that signifies I'm done, like the ringing of the bell, right? Which you see in a lot of cancer treatment centers. And so that's why I asked about what you see when you first entered. If you could see that beautiful courtyard, what you could see, because what is that inspiration for? That's where I want to get to. That means I've conquered this. And just wondering if with a slight shift of orientation and therefore your courtyard here potentially playing off of this existing waterway, are there then options to kind of open up that view also. I love the idea of the waterfall, right? The sounds, the acoustics, the healing that it creates. But is there also then an opportunity that you create this beyond the campus aspirational view for this is ultimately my goal, to be healthy, to be out, and to be back out amongst.
Thank you. Hannah, I think you'd be a very effective presenter in a practice because, you know, in the heat of project presentations, you know, where the developer is thinking, I'm not going to spend $100 million on this one. And the designers are thinking, is he or she going to buy it? They could wheel you in, you'd bring the temperature down. This is a good thing. It's a good thing. But I'm sorry, I'm a Brit, you know, I'm not particularly kind. I don't necessarily always exist in the orbit of saying kind things. I do think there's a soundtrack here, but maybe the movie isn't as compelling as it might be. And I think the things that you've done well, I think this connection into this infrastructural logic, I think works. I think this is good. I think you've worked hard at producing every last cleaner's cupboard and Belfast sink and mop cupboard. And I think all that's good. So it's very forensic, you know, and I admire that. Now, the difficulty, and I think the difficulty is one of scale. And I just instinctively feel this is too big. But it's been drawn in a way that makes it smaller. And I find that really, really interesting. I think in your mind, you got in your head a scale of spaces, which is not actually borne out in terms of the reality of the building. Item A for the prosecution, 3-zone plans. As soon as you get into 3-zone plans, you know there's a kind of struggle. And they are characteristic of certain healthcare facilities where you start creating racetrack plans, which I think are disorientating, and which also create an environmental condition, you know, in the center block there, irrespective of whether it's full of mops or plastic bags or whatever the hell, you know, or catheters. Inherently, whatever's going on in here and in here and in here is not nice. It's not nice. And what you're trying to do is create an atmosphere of care, of healing, of redemption from this dreadful thing that's happened to people. I thought the Aria Adam thing was very cute. You know, you personify. No, but I mean, it's a smart way of doing things because you're talking about making routes around the building and you're bringing somebody's personal case history into that. But I think it's all about this space, and I've got a difficulty with it. It's not that I could deny the aspiration, but I think it's underdescribed. I have absolutely no idea what's happening here. It isn't drawn at any one point. And the kind of interesting thing is it's this apse, you know, it's the cathedral apse, and it's on the edge of this new forest. And I've got absolutely no idea what it feels like. And to me, you know, we were talking with Paul's project about immersion in nature. You've got similar kind of themes. Colleague, I think, mentioned about feeding the ducks. I thought that was really nice. So there's a kind of potential route there. And I think the difficulty is what's happening. The blocks arranged around the courtyard don't have interaction with it. They're divorced from it somehow. And it's a classic problem of integration of exterior space and interior space. The other thing is the weather here is making me feel right at home. It's just like being in London. You know, it's humid and it's kind of rain and the streets look kind of uninviting and so on. I'm trying to think what this is like when it's wet, because this is the star. This is Ava Gardner in Flying Dutchman. You know, this is or whatever the movie's called. You know the movie, I mean, James Mason, Ava Gardner, beautiful movie. This is Ava Gardner, okay? These somehow need to interact with it in a way that's believable. And it may be that actually this is in the current depiction. I think it's under designed. I think it's under designed. I think it needs to have some areas which could be covered. I think these need to impinge upon it. We need to know what's going on here. And also, actually, this is kind of, it's big, but you've drawn it in a foreshortened version of what the reality is. I don't think this is it. Don't believe it. And I'll be a bit unkind. I don't think you draw as well as you should do to match the aspiration of what you want the building to be. These need to have a kind of a grain, a textile, a texture, a materiality to them, which is compatible with the aspirations you have. So there is, to me, a mismatch between what you draw and what you aspire to. And you know, I don't want to sound negative, but it would be dishonest if I didn't mention it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Joseph Williams, the chair, to do a little summing up here.
Thank you, Hannah. Good job. Congratulations for making it all this way. I think we had a really interesting discussion, and we were eventually able to really get down to the brass tacks of your design and how to go about this vision. I think everyone's on board with your vision, and this comes from a deep place in Hannah's heart and experience. She has deep compassion for this. I think maybe one thing to take away from the way this presentation went is pretty quickly in a presentation, you can move on to technical aspects, to the physical and concrete elements, and even your design principles. Maybe there's a way to be more specific than those three sort of generic design principles: comfort, etc. You know, you wanted communal space to face towards the court. You wanted contemplative individual space to face outward. That's a concrete design principle. And you had others that I didn't think quite made it into the presentation. One of the really interesting things about the discussion was scale. And if you kept working through this and tried to reduce its scale and make it more intimate, I think you'd find wonderful solutions to that problem of making this space less stressful, which your scientific research showed. Stress is actually directly deleterious towards progression of cancer. So that's really the game right now, and other cancer centers are trying to address the same problem, but you're well on the way towards some new solutions. So well done.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll just throw in one thing, is that before you put all this in your portfolio, the site plan is very legible. The plans are less so. And were we to have some poche onto the buildings, some occupiable poche, some light screens that we could identify circulation versus places of repose versus service space, it would be helpful. And that to see in the plans the lush environment around them that you intend, and also to have the courtyard rendered in a way that we can see it spatially. So there's a kind of balance between how much you poche in the building and how much you poche in the courtyard. So you get a reading like the reading on the left-hand side. Hey, thank you so very much. Folks, we're going to take a brief break. If you need to do the restrooms, you can do that. There's coffee and yummies over there if you'd like that. We need to flip this wall around. So by the time you come back at noon, this wall will be flipped around and we'll be ready to start on the next presentation. Thank you.
Oh, yes, it's me. Oh, yeah. So like, and like giant tapestry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. But, you know, the game,
A lot of people because it did a massive. And a lot of, yeah, there was. Okay, I want to make sure. Yeah,
Stanley and I are supposed to be on the beach. I imagine it's on a half hour later. You do. Well, he's already trying out. I'm trying to reach out to my colleagues. So I'm not just my you don't read that. Go down and continue. Well, because they haven't done it. So, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think
Hello, good to see you again. Exciting to see everyone's stuff finally up on the board. So excited. Oh, good. Early still.
I believe so.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, try it. There you go. Don't give away all that.
I'm trying not to.
There, when speaking to the microphone, you have to hold it like this. You can't hold it down here. So
Have my hands.
it's not as sensitive as.
Yeah, project a little bit. Do both work or do we want to use one versus the other? Is that the one I need to use or is this the one I need?
That's
to
yours. This is the.
Wonderful.
And keep in mind, we're on YouTube and we're on Facebook. So we're not filtering it on.
Is it all right if I walk around still or?
We have,
Oh, I mean, walk around long.
absolutely, we have 4 minutes.
4 minutes, lovely.
You're a pacer, you know.
I am a pacer.
I would look people in the eye and smile. You know what? It's harder to be rough with somebody when you got a smile.
Positivity, as we talked about. Probably one of the ones. Yeah, I guess in the.
Yeah.
Actually match my boards.
About that. Really, they look really good. Oh.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Start the morning out light.
Yeah, it's nice to know that you can find maybe. Folks, if we could start making our way back to center court here. We're going to be facing south. Let's give our guests a chance to sit down. Let's grab our last cups of coffee. Some people are getting a doppio espresso with caramel or something over there. Soy latte. And then you have to give them your name. This is why I like Italy better. You don't have to give them your name.
It's a classic for a reason.
So, folks, we're at about decision height. Okay, so we're going to get started here. You know, the morning has had this theme of the redemptive quality of landscape and how architecture and landscape can go together to create wellness. This is there's a darkness, Peter Noonan was saying, to this morning's themes, but hopefully the designs bring light into these areas of darkness. So we're going to look at a phenomena that exists in Japan that is a very unfortunate phenomena of a very high suicide rate. And we're going to look at something called untangling the sea of trees. And Addison Richmond is going to be sharing her thesis with us. Professor of the practice, Peter Noonan, was the chair, and the committee consisted of Joseph Williams and myself. And so go right ahead.
Thank you, Professor Kelly. Before we get started, as mentioned, this is going to discuss some pretty heavy subjects related to mental health, specifically depression and suicide. So I do invite you at this point to make sure to prioritize yourself throughout this presentation with regards to your own personal mental health and how this could affect you. Suicide rates in Japan, as mentioned, are excessively high, resulting in over 30,000 deaths in individuals every single year. With this, it is the first leading cause of death for young adults in Japan. Things like work stress, a very dense urban landscape, and stigma surrounding mental health all contribute to these numbers, resulting in many individuals seeking out the Akigahara forest as their only option, as a place to take their last breaths. So with these high rates, we have to ask ourselves how the built environment, specifically things like the work environment, as represented in Shinjuku, Tokyo, and the Akigahara forest as a final resting place for many individuals, figures into this narrative. How can architecture be utilized to act as restorative environments and decrease stress rates rather than raise them? But before we can talk about how architecture can impact individuals' mental health, we first have to determine why individuals contemplate committing suicide. Research shows us that things like individual behavior and social circumstances are the two leading causes of negative health, both physically and mentally. Because both of these tie into the built environment, it is our responsibility as architects to consider how our environments feature and feed into these issues, and how we can, as architects, utilize things to improve people's mental health and untangle the sea of trees. The typical day of an individual living in Shinjuku, Tokyo, usually looks something like this. A small studio apartment is a common place for young individuals to live. Being one of the most dense areas in Tokyo itself, This area has very little green space and instead is very dense and is known for having a large corporate environment with little access to restorative spaces for individuals to reflect and pause. On their way to work, most individuals would take a train, being completely underground, completely devoid of any natural light or the natural environment. Crowded subways results in overcrowding, but with little social interaction. And once in the office itself, most office spaces are cramped and usually have a very high stress related to very honor-based society ideals of encouraging overworking, resulting in over 60% of individuals saying that they are overworked on the day-to-day. Because of this, and because of the stigma surrounding mental health, individuals often have a hard time finding healthy coping mechanisms, and instead are forced to take more drastic choices. Many see the Akigahara forest as their only option. Located an hour and a half outside of Tokyo, the Akigahara forest is usually accessed by either bus or train. Local commuter buses take individuals into the forest where there are trails located for individuals to do some positive things like hiking, but also is the perfect location for individuals to contemplate their existence and consider life and what would happen if they did not any longer exist. The deep foliage makes it hard to see visibility. The thick ground covering causes it to be excessively quiet. And the rough terrain makes it difficult for individuals to circulate throughout the space, meaning that it's a very isolative and eerie environment. On the other hand, though, we know that nature is shown to improve mental health. So how can we turn this kind of on its head? How can we look into this forest and see it as a place of hope, inspiration, and restorative landscape rather than something that individuals see as their only and final option? Let's first consider how the office environment is affecting individuals to make this decision. Starting out in Shinjuku, Tokyo, as I mentioned, located towards the center of Tokyo, the site is located directly adjacent to the Shinjuku train station, the busiest train station in the world, and is flanked by office spaces towards the north and small retail towards the south. The buildings around vary in size, but it's fairly devoid of any green spaces. Therefore, the introduction of a restorative, sunken, Zen-style garden could be a great opportunity for individuals to reflect, pause, and engage with their environment. Utilizing a strong linear path through the center of the site, individuals could be encouraged to engage with nature and observe and view the surrounding area, pausing and reflecting on their daily commute to work. The sunken garden allows for a more secluded and peaceful environment, while the backdrop of a mass timber constructed office building serves as the perfect backdrop to this garden space. Along the street edge of the site, small restorative rooms based on Japanese tea rooms can be introduced to encourage individuals to pause even longer if required. Instead of simply sitting at one's desk during lunch hours, one could engage within these individual spots, very much like a tea ceremony, taken for themselves, giving them the opportunity to reflect, pause, and spend time looking out into nature. Each of these tea rooms represents a different arrangement of the tatami mat system, and each of the windows is oriented to give you a separate view of the garden space, allowing individuals to have a unique experience in each of these restorative rooms. The garden is featured as the central piece of this project, being directly located in the center. It can be observed from above, but then also can be circulated down into for those that are interested in a restorative walk. Even from outside the site, individuals can catch glimpses of the garden itself as they walk along the street edge and are able to see the mass timber construction in the distance of the office building. Sunken Garden also features a community space at the base of the building towards the garden, which allows for individuals to perhaps take place, enjoy after work activities rather than just rushing back to their apartments. Mass timber is utilized not only as a kind of homage back to the forest itself, but also to reflect the traditional Japanese joinery that we see throughout Japan. But even with these steps taken in the forest itself, individuals will still most likely still consider and have issues with their mental health. Therefore, a secondary site located within the Akigahara forest, the location of many of these suicides, is necessary. As mentioned, the Akigahara forest is very dense. Therefore, including a strong linear path throughout the site is used as a way to organize individuals and to give them direction and meaning throughout their experience on the site. Individuals are encouraged to observe the views throughout the site and throughout this linear path as it changes while they walk along the path itself. Featured on one side are the buildings of more communal spaces, such as a visitor center and a workspace. And then to the other side, the Zen garden is allowed to create a microcosm of views for the individual to reflect. As seen here. While the collective is emphasized on one side of this linear path, the individual is also emphasized towards the other side. These restorative hoteling type spaces are provided for individuals that have to stay an extended period of time or seek to stay here to reflect over a long extended period. Once again, based on Japanese wood joinery, wood is used as a way to connect individuals back to nature as they progress along this path. Topographical changes also allow individuals to engage further with the site. At the beginning of the procession, individuals are encouraged to walk down the steps, engaging with the ground physically. And as they progress more and more and more, the landscape drops down further and further until the point where individuals are engaging with the trees themselves, are able to see out into the landscape and beyond to Mount Fuji. Throughout this presentation, I've shown how things like traditional Japanese joinery, views out into nature, and specific circulation patterns that encourage individuals to engage with their site can be utilized to improve mental health. Through this, we hope that individuals are encouraged to reflect, pause, and consider untangling the sea of trees. Thank you.
This building or both?
The answer would be both.
It was a desire to understand. Perhaps you could just take us through the second building. I understand that you've got individual pods for, pods for an individual experience, but maybe some of the other spaces so we sort of understand perhaps as a as a support building, a building of support, a building of refuge or further contemplation about life. Then how does the person coming here by bus or by train engage with building 2?
Yes. I think that is actually a very key significant thing to emphasize where you said preventing. The office space would kind of be seen as a preventative method versus this would be more of a response to when an individual can no longer be prevented their ideas of perhaps completing suicide, but instead it's kind of one last option to encourage individuals to pause and reflect before making that decision. So from a programmatic standpoint, There's a visitor center located as this first primary largest building. A work/collaboration space is the second, featuring some workspaces, individual kind of workrooms, and then a kitchen-style space in support of the individual kind of reflecting rooms that are more hotel-styled. So therefore, individuals are encouraged to follow the path, similar to like a monastery design, back into the communal spaces.
I guess I'm less interested in the program and more interested in the experience. I think that will speak to the architecture and some of your architectural decisions. So who am I? Am I the weekender, or am I the person that booked or reserved a 4-hour window to be with this building?
Yes. In this,
Take me there. Take
yes.
me there.
In this case, you could be either. So individuals often go to the site as a weekend type of trip. It's similar to like a state park would be here in the US. So to that extent, individuals could simply experience the path itself without entering the buildings, therefore kind of experiencing this interaction with the landscape, experiencing the steps down into the site, the Zen garden, etc. Whereas individuals that are specifically going here for a restorative retreat would have more privacy in these individual spaces and therefore would engage with the buildings, not just the path itself.
I have a question also trying to understand the relationship of this tall building, office building with the tea houses that you had there, how that relates to this.
Yes, of course. So you were asking about kind of the relationship between the office building to the site in the Akigahara forest, is that correct?
And the tea houses there, how do they relate? How does all relate?
Yes. So whereas the city would be seen as a preventative method, so it's trying to encourage people before they even are maybe suffering from depression or suicidal tendencies, how can we change an office environment to encourage positive mental health? So for example, with having views out to nature, with using materials that we know encourage more tactile experiences, more natural daylighting, preventing suicidal tendencies from even occurring. Whereas on the site itself in the Akigahara forest, this would be more related to what if the preventative methods are not fully effective.
They're separate.
Yes, separate programmatically and in site location, but similar themes. Yes.
Addison, thanks very much. Look, it's conceptually very rich. You've brought sketches, thank God. And you've also brought intelligence to this incredible social issue. I mean, interestingly, even in the UK where I come from, the primary cause of death among males under 45 is suicide. I mean, this is, yes, it's a Japanese problem, it's a Korean problem and so on and so forth, but it's actually a global problem. So there's an incredible poignancy and relevance to this. I don't understand how the 10-story piece relates to the rest of it. I'm not sure I really care, because you talked about it being somehow some reminiscence of the office environment and so on. I mean, I've been to Shinjuku quite a few times. I mean, it's a very intense environment. And, just on the edge of it, as you know, there are all those kind of bars where the salary men and women get absolutely mullered in the evening and then fall asleep on the pavement and never get home. It's a crazy car crash of stuff going on. I think the difficulty with this kind of project, which is an experiential project, is its creator, you, investing too much certainty into the way in which people will react to it. You're saying people will sit in a certain environment and they will confront their stress, or they'll confront the idea of stigma, and so we can't guarantee that. And I think you have to, in your explanation, allow for very different reactions to it. If I was a benevolent Japanese developer who was deciding, well, this is exactly what we need to build in this forest. So, so all the guys get on the bus and they all come back. and they're not found hanging from trees and all the other dreadful things that happen in the forest. How do you make people aware of this? Because what you're doing here it goes beyond the idea of making a piece of architecture. It's actually creating some kind of step change into social mores and the whole extraordinary work ethic that suffuses Japanese cities. How do I know about it? You know, is there something on the bulletin board in my corporate office that tells me I could go there? Do I see an ad on the bus or on the metro? I mean, I'm just trying. I don't expect you to have all the answers to these things, but I think when you have the ambition to create something that potentially can synthesize a big social change, you have to accept that it might not work the way you anticipate. So many buildings don't. You know, that's the extraordinary thing. They have unintended consequences. There's a great book called How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand, old book now. He was the editor of the Whole Earth catalogue. And he talks about the way in which something gets built for one purpose and becomes something else. And I think this might actually metamorphose into something completely different. Who knows? But I don't really have a question. It's not really a criticism, and it is an observation. But I think it's also a warning that the aspiration can sometimes be confounded by the way people would actually use it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I got to do my job. Prefer Phil Donahue to Jerry Springer, by the way. I'm not going to throw any chairs.
Thank you. Addison?
Yes.
Is that right? This is a beautiful project.
Thank you.
Your renderings are gorgeous. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you've put into this. Throughout your presentation, I wasn't sure what this building was. So I think just a little bit more clarity in the introduction about that this is an office building. And then also the purpose of the building that's in the forest. Personally, I think it would have been good to choose one rather than trying to do both. And really and I would have chosen the building in the forest. Because I think that you can do both prevention and treatment in that forest, in that same building. And by having both prevention, families coming and they want to explore, but they're also, maybe there are tea rooms in that building. And having people who are being treated, that starts to take away the stigma as well. And, social isolation, which is something that is a huge problem in Japan and the US and many other places, if there's this communal aspect to it, which I think you've gotten at already with your design, but also having people on all kind of stages of the mental health spectrum able to come together. And I can't remember what else I was going to say, but really nice work. And
Thank you so much.
So with the building in the city, I'm intrigued by the outdoor space, but what I don't understand is how does that outdoor space connect to the urban environment around it? And is it a space that people can flow through, or is it a space that's only for the people that are working in that building? Because if you're thinking about the larger premise of trying to, provide this soothing experience for, the masses, I think this maybe could extend beyond its limits within the site and engage the larger environment. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then my other question is, as I'm seeing the building in the forest, is this this is an elevated walkway?
That is correct.
So I'd like to hear what your thoughts were about creating that experience that's up and above and not in, right? Because you're in this interstitial space, you're surrounded by the forest, but you're not in the forest and experiencing the tactile piece of it.
So to answer your first question, which I believe you were asking kind of about this kind of outdoor gardens and garden space and how that relates to the urban fabric around it. Is that correct? Yes. So in both of these cases, nature is kind of thought of in two different ways. This being more of a kind of courtyard style protecting nature. So creating this kind of insulated, more private experience with nature itself. There would be access to individuals that would like to engage with the site through this elevated path that allows individuals that aren't necessarily in the garden itself, but if you're walking to get from this intersection to this intersection, you could cut through the space and enjoy the kind of the views without disrupting the more private level down, which is the sunken garden itself, specifically that you cannot access except through a building. So therefore, the garden space is private, whereas the elevated walkway would be considered a public space. Does that? And then to answer your second question with regards to, I believe you're asking about the experience kind of from a sectional standpoint and how this linear path elevated above the ground plane, kind of the nature of that. Is that correct? So in this case, many of the current situational issues that we have within the forest is the lack of visibility, and individuals, once they're in the forest itself, it's a very overwhelming experience where it's hard to see kind of past the sea of trees. It's hard to kind of think of life outside of the forest. So the idea with the elevated path is allowing individuals to kind of see the forest in a new light from a new angle, and then also increasing visibility so you can see the beauty of the forest without being kind of in the depth, the ruts, the dirt, and kind of the experiencing the more negative kind of emotional and physical attributes of the forest itself.
I applaud you for taking on this subject. We hear a lot about, to address mental illness, we have to change the perspective of mental illness and encouraging people to speak of it, speak of personal experience, you know, be a voice, because so often it's a hidden, quiet, unspoken, unmentioned thing, right? So I guess my interest would be, you know, if you take this on further, right? I could see a whole maybe doctorate, right? If this is a new form of office building, what I would love to see more of and hear more of is how do the spaces within that building, because they're rendered as open floor plates, how is that different from what these young men are experiencing, right? What is the theory behind how the space is allocated per person, or instead of the long linear, which that looks like my office right now, the long linear person by person by person layout, you know, the individual spaces, or even just the mix. I'd love to have like heard a little bit more about how what you're doing within the building is helping to alleviate some of that stress that comes from the physical layout and the either too close proximity or not close proximity that these workers engage in every day. Because, and then, you know, once you get out into the, you know, working world, you know, you also have to be able to, as a developer, as an architect, to really, I hate to say it, sell why you want to make a change. So if that city is the way it is because there is a financial model that works, that we pack people in, we pack them into small apartments, we pack them into offices, and that is what's driving the development currently. As architects, as planners, as developers, we have to be able to present the case and the argument for why things need to change and why it is a benefit to that developer, to that builder, to that property owner to perhaps spend a little differently and all because, you know, and so there's a lot of great science out there on everything from an indoor environment, qualities, daylight, access to views that, you know, if you haven't had the chance to really dig into that, could really help bolster, I think, you know, your argument here. For the forest site, again, going back to the idea of changing the perspective and changing the view, if I'm understanding this correctly, this building is at sort of or near the drop-off point where you would come by bus or you're at the start of the forest. One thing to think of, again, if you further explore, is people go to the forest, unfortunately, to be their end. What if, is there a way that you can take your building and change the perspective of the forest, that is, you know, change the meaning why people go? So what if that building was more within the forest and it became a destination? That place, similar to the conversation we had about around healthcare and that goal, that light that they're getting to, rather than the first place you land amongst in this forest, that you could then go off deeper into the forest and potentially, you know, harm. And then just one thing to think of, right? What if the whole idea of this forest could change because of that building's placement within it? The one concern I have around some of the imagery or construction is, for me, and this might not be for everyone, but some of the structures that I see, for me, relate a little bit too much to the natural structures that potentially individuals might utilize to do harm to themselves. So that was just one, and again, that's my sort of gut reaction that I had to some of those forms, as well as the very elevated, high, abrupt end to the walkway. So as someone said, we can't ever fully guess how everyone is going to react to our architecture, to our design, but that was just one thing that sort of popped to me about maybe kind of considering some of the way that you've laid out that space and how you've framed it a little bit.
Thank you.
Thanks. My first question is, how did you decide this subject and Japan? Have you been to Japan?
Yes, so I studied abroad in Japan during my undergraduate degree and fell in love with the culture and the architecture, of course. But mental health is something, especially with architecture and environmental psychology, that I'm passionate about. So being able to kind of combine a culture that I'm very fascinated by and that I've been able to experience, along with the style of architecture that I think is really something we're just starting to realize how much our buildings affect us mentally as well as physically.
And for the office building, you know, there are no fire stairs, there's no, you know, any of that stuff. So what's going on? Because it almost, this elevation here almost look like bookshelves, you know.
So with regards to the office building, as mentioned, this could be a PhD project. This could go on forever. Currently, the office building was seen almost more as a backdrop to the garden itself. The garden was really the point of design. This was more so, this is, you know, a pretty typical square footage of an office space, open floor plate type of idea. In the future, yes, 100% designing it all the way through would be ideal. But currently, it's more so of a backdrop to this garden space we're experiencing here in the center of the site.
Well, that brings up then the question, why not pick a real building somewhere there in Tokyo and then build your garden in relationship to that? Or look at people that are really understanding bringing the type of garden space into the architecture of the office. Point of reference, this is stuff that Foster and Partners does where they plug in, I'm going to call it pocket gardens in the fabric of that building so that it is readily accessible. And that's a whole study in itself, how that's done. Everything from the Gherkin building to I think it's Commerce Bank or in Frankfurt. And so that people are really looking at how to do that instead of just relying on a park at the bottom of the building. So I'm just throwing that out because all of the attributes you have in that park could be part of that building. And then you have to really understand how to do that with the structure, the elevators, and that's a challenge. So that's what I see here. Then for all of this, I can see you're truly, and you answered it, fascinated by Japanese contemporary architecture and even the stuff at Quito and Quito? No, sorry. At any rate, how do the professionals, and I'm going to say professionals for mental health, psychiatrists, psychologists, whoever, work? I'm going to assume that you need professionals here to help people go through whatever their issues are. And I mean, it's almost, and then I also wonder, what religion is this sort of like a omni-religious, anybody and everybody can come here no matter what their belief is. And then in some cases it could even be sort of confessional and, so I think you have great facility with the Asian aesthetic of architecture, and you have fun with that, and it looks great. But then when you layer on some of the real life components, both for that and for this, how does it work?
Thank you. Yes, in relationship to kind of the question of the professional kind of mental health professional aspects. This building in the forest is very much based off of a project by Kingo Kuma, who has kind of this restoration retreat center currently in Japan that was created for a large office company called Dentsu. And the program on this is kind of in reflection to that, whereas in Japan, unfortunately, kind of our Western ideals of seeing mental health from, oh, I meet with a mental health professional, we talk for an hour a week, is only now starting to become a popular option. Instead, kind of how one could use less stigmatized versions of mental health. So things like garden walks. Forest bathing is a term they use for kind of engaging with the landscape. It's a very common form of mental health treatment there, where you are literally told, go walk in the woods for this set amount of time. So those are the types of activities that would be emphasized in this location. And I think your reference to like religion and how that would feature in is fascinating, especially in Japan, where religion is very much a mixture of many different religions and cultures. Throughout the site, it would be open to all because it has that public element. But with the Zen gardens, it definitely emphasizes some of the Buddhist ideals that are popular in Japan.
So, wow. I'm quite impressed. I'm so happy that you got the applause on your sketches. Those by themselves are wonderful. I agree with Michael a little bit in terms of trying to think if you went far enough for this and how far you'd have to go beyond this, because for me, a lot of the things that aren't talked about, and I don't know how your plan works, I don't know what those spaces are, but to me, they could be many different things. This could be religious shrine, this could be the wellness center, hiking in Japan is, Hokkaido Road, and, that my friend just got back from Japan on a hike, and so that's an important part. So, experiencing the ground. So, I think the big moves you did, I mean, gosh, I see John Haydick. You have lots, whether it's Japanese or not, there's the spine and all that kind of thing. A lot of things could happen here. And your architecture will allow that. I like how light you step on the ground. I don't think there were any trees there before you started, but maybe there were. But I can see it growing back. It's remedial. So I think it allows the viewer to read what they want to read in this. And, whether that office building works or not, I mean, it's probably, like you say, is not the point, but it's fascinating. So it's thought provoking. And I think it can go beyond what this discussion is about.
I agree. Thank you.
Anybody else? Did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Please.
So just a few thoughts, Addison, and I always speak in pretty simple terms, so I leave the academics to handle the niceties. I'm closest to the sketches, so I'm fortunate. So I get to maybe talk a little bit about this. The headline is this. I think if you number these panels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think it's less of 4 and 5 and more of 1, 2, and 3.
I would agree.
Your heart and the passion for wanting to address this really difficult issue head on, I think no one is going to deny it. It resonates in your voice. And I would really be interested for you to really think about how this visitor, this experience functions, and really get into the spaces and really think about how you want your audience to react and engage with this. I mean, I look at some of the sketches and you go from sort of a solid arch, which might be kind of an idea of embracing and support, and then you dither that spacing of that arch, if you will, is a modern arch. And I'd love to know what you were thinking about that. I would love to hear things like, okay, well, therapy in the Western context is not what happens here. So I'm imagining now things like, okay, you come to this building and before you go into nature, here's a grove of trees, and these trees are the trees that you expect to see when you're on the outdoor path. And maybe you're telling people to, while you're here, appreciate the fact that you may not come here every week, but there's so much around here for you to see the next time you return. And you spend some time to really tell us and tell yourself, what happens in this lovely building. What experiences do you want people to have? You've got a long walkway, and you're talking about tough subjects. And I have to say, and I'm sure somebody in your class said, well, isn't that a suicide jump?
It was mentioned. I would emphasize that when individuals go into this forest, they go with a very explicit intent of a certain way that they would complete suicide, and it's not jumping off a building. And as odd as it sounds, actually, usually individuals stay within their kind of modus operandi as far as what intention they would do. However, yes, a high rail would definitely be encouraged in this case.
I don't know, or maybe it's straight for a while, and then you give them, you sort of you have this really crazy stare at the end, but maybe there's a more gracious way for this to peter off and gently allow people then to go off on their experience. Particularly, imagine engaging with the woods after you've taught them something, after they come through the building. So that's sort of what I would offer. But yeah, the renderings are lovely. This, the building is handsome. The materials are great. Having the stone and having the wood, very primary materials that help people understand. You've got the mountain in the background, so we can be inspired. We can, reflect. We can be, all of those kinds of things can happen here.
Thank you.
So Addison, congratulations. This is a great project. It's beautiful. I'm really, really intrigued by it. It just, this is an architectural historian's point of view now. So I've been studying these monasteries that are meant to be, this is very Eurocentric. So some of the things I'm going to say might not apply to Japan, but they're really fascinating because they're designed to put people in confrontation with the natural world. So that's what really fascinated me about them. So they have to do two things. They have to be sort of self-sufficient to a certain degree because they're so much far out of the world. And then they have to provide different layers of experience to these religious people who went into them seeking for spiritual fulfillment. So when it comes to the self-sufficiency aspect, that was really interesting to learn how monks would carry out a lot of their daily activities by embarking in prayer at the same time. So it was like a mental exercise to also get them thinking about their role while there in the monastery. So that got me thinking about, the program that you're presenting and how the users of this building could also engage in some of the daily activities. So garden keeping and that kind of thing, cooking, that kind of thing. There was also two different ways to engage with the natural world. It was really interesting. So one was through designed gardens. So they had really beautiful gardens. They were loaded with meaning. Some of the references hark back to the Garden of Eden, those kinds of things. And then there was also the more brutal sort of facing of the natural world. And that occurred in faraway little hermitages, they call them, or hermit little cells out in the world, which kind of remind me of the ones you present here. That was more, more brutal, just because they would have to be faced with the wilderness as it is. So that's also, I think, important to think about. I don't know maybe a whole lot about Japanese culture, but I do know that they have a very rich tradition of landscaping. Yes. And you know that we looked at that in one of the courses. So I think the potential also to go a little bit further. And I know that that's always the question with thesis projects, right? There's always like the little thing that, but it's so beautiful. The idea, the plan is also very enticing. Somebody was talking about Doug. I also was thinking about a little bit of postmodern design, but also Japanese as well. There's a little bit of Tadawando there. I don't know. It's very, very beautiful. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Professor Burke, I wonder just how much of the opportunity here is to contrast both the sublime looking out towards Fuji and the rugged forest. The forest, we saw an image of it, and I've seen many over the course of the semester and know that the forest is quite sublime. And the differentiation between the sublime and the beautiful is in the sublime, there is an awesome, not as in awesome dude, but in its original connotation, that it's this, greater than life, threatening, and yet at the same time conveying an intense connection to nature in a different way than a sand garden that perhaps is extraordinarily beautiful, provides a microcosm, and is serene. So I think that's interesting. I just want to say before I hand the microphone over to Peter, as the person that has seen all of these projects, that the process that Addison used here, this is just a fragment of the material that she generated by hand. Her process was to draw, to model, to put tracing paper over the top of the model, to draw, to diagram, to remodel, to do the same thing over and over as an iterative process, which is what architects do. We don't just sit there and say, well, Revit made me do it, or SketchUp made me do it, or the component warehouse made me do it. And at the same time, throughout this, every single day that I sat down with Addison, there were new precedents, there were new things. It was like one of the richest. I'd usually see her after lunch, and this was like having a second lunch or a dessert afterwards. There were things to think about and talk about. And in my mind, in listening to you guys, that you know, there's a difference between making a building and making a proposition that carries through the idea of a thesis. And I've very much felt that through the course of this project, that this is a project that carries through the idea of a thesis. I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder.
It was perfect. You did mention already some of the things I wanted to say, so I don't have to say them twice. But I really want to thank you, Addison. And David, I could not have said it better. You brought sketches and intelligence to us this morning, and you sponsored a great conversation. And that's wonderful for a thesis proposition. I think the comments were very well taken. I think, and I was speaking with Julie just before, you know, two sites, two projects. It was really kind of three sites at the beginning. You know, the setup of the problem was this urban condition that most of the population in Japan lives with, and then the unfortunate nature of the forest for some of this population. Certainly people go to the forest for other reasons. And so that kind of, the polar kind of conditions that we see beautifully in the section, right, with the forest at one end and the city at the other, were part of the setup of the problem. And we were thinking, okay, let's explore the working environment and the forest. And then at some point, the idea of a piece of the forest and the city and the forest started to drive the project forward more, and solving kind of three big kind of design propositions became less focused than two, the garden here. And so, Michael, your comments about kind of the workings of the tower building were really kind of secondary to the main thrust of the thesis. And then the process too that Brian already alluded to, like, so Addison she just kept bringing drawings and drawings. I wish I had seen some of the digital processes more at the beginning, but that's a problem that is much more unique in the student body right now. Currently, we'll see digital stuff and we won't see the hand drawings and the model making. And so, Addison, I think you're a role model for doing more of that stuff, but some of this stuff early on is helpful too. And then the last thing I want to say is, like, so a thesis match, you know, okay, suicide and forest is kind of a dark subject matter, but Addison is such an effusive and bright personality that, and I've had some similar thesis kind of fixations myself when I was a student. And so I was like, this will be a really fun project and a fun person to work with for the year. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Professor Newton.
Thank you, Addison. And so for the faculty and for our guest reviewers, we're going to have lunch upstairs, but I received an ominous note from one of our assistants that said, because of the traffic, the weather and whatnot, the lunch is slightly delayed. So if we make our way up to the conference room, we should have something set up by about 1:15 or so. And that should give us about 15 minutes to talk and recap what we've done and socialize, and then catch lunch before we start back down here at 2 o'clock. For the students presenting, ask that you, this afternoon, ask that you all work together to get everything hung on the walls. And as we just did with this incredible Wheel of Fortune, or not, whatever it is, flipping the letters around, that you try to do that with the presentations ahead of us. If this panel only has one side of pinup space, do it as move that row of panels behind it so that we can set up two and then pull things apart. It's just a little bit of, whoever was in theater tech in high school, this is the time to remember how to do a scene change. I never was. Obviously I was acting. So let's move upstairs.
Thank you for pushing me.
Cemetery, mausoleum. If you'd like to see what we do,